Weighing the balance of the void, Ambassador Kalen Var leaned forward, the worn synthetic leather of his command chair groaning a familiar protest beneath his weight. The display glass showed the vault ruin, a derelict, spindle-shaped station that had once serviced the pre-apostasy transit lanes of the Viridian Divide. Now it was a skeleton of fused alloy and silent solar panels orbiting a gas giant known only as the Great Witness. Kalen's diplomatic cutter, the Scale, was a speck against its mass. They were here on a dubious last-ditch mission of salvage and political interception. Jurisdiction update on the Iron Clerk presence. Kalen's voice was low, cutting through the low thrum of the Scale's maneuvering thrusters. The ship's AI jurisdiction, or JD, replied with the clinical detachment of pure calculation. The vessel designated requisition, a heavy frigate operating under a Class 4 asset, seizure writ, will enter effective interdiction range in T-minus 47 minutes 11 seconds. Its trajectory implies a direct boarding action. They are moving with calculated legal impunity. Kalen ran a hand over his tired face. Impunity cloaked in a mountain of paper, JD. That's their specialty. Captain Serena Kalen's head of security and tactical ops glanced back from the main sensor array. Her short, dark hair was tied back tightly. They have 3 gunboats shadowing the requisition. The sensor profile is thick with low-band ECM. They don't want the Scale getting a clean count of their assets before they arrive. The air in the cockpit was cool, faintly smelling of ozone and recycled oxygen, a sterile scent that always felt out of place near ancient ruins. They care about the count only because it validates their claim. Kalen sighed. If they board and claim this ruin under Treaty 7 Gamma, they legitimize all future seizures in the Divide. It shifts the precedent for the entire sector. This was the true stake, not the scrap metal, but the legal framework the cartel sought to impose. Kalen zoomed the main display onto a specific section of the ruin's hull, a point where the outer alloy shell had been blasted clean, exposing an inner wall of a dense, non-reflective gray material. Etched deeply into the gray was a symbol, a perfect circle bisected by a wavy vertical line crossed horizontally by a delicate asymmetric balance arm. The sigil of the balance, a ghost from the age of measure 3 millennia past. That's the reason we are here, Serena. The clerks only care about the vault's contents. We care about who put the vault here. Kalen felt a faint rhythmic hum vibrating through the deck plates, a frequency too low for most human ears, yet registered subtly by the Scale's deep-field sensors. It was the sleeping array, the ancient promise. JD had registered the faint energy signature almost a week ago, far outside the immediate conflict zone orbiting a stable sun-facing node of the Viridian Transit Ring, the independent salvage vessel. The dust mote was making a strained deceleration burn. The vessel was small, cramped, and piloted by the Grelkin family, a 3-generation collective of low-tariff scavengers. Father, the energy drain is too high. We must offload the Grade 3 cabling, pleaded the youngest, a gangly teenager named Krell. His father, a grizzled veteran with cybernetic optical implants, shook his head slowly. No, son. The cabling is what gets us out of the Divide. The Iron Clerks tax anything static, anything they can prove you were holding. They look for ledgers for receipts. But moving assets something to sell on the next jump, that is harder for them to seize lawfully. Krell gripped the control yoke, frustration etched on his face. But the requisition is out there. If they teach us a lesson about lawful possession, we lose everything. The mother, keeping a watchful eye on the long-range distress frequencies, placed a heavy, reassuring hand on Krell's shoulder. We trust the transit authorities. They may be slow, but they follow the old laws, not the clerk's new predatory ones. They only had hours to decide if they could outrun the inevitable legal dragnet. Kaylin and Serena, clad in light atmosphere suits, breached the vault ruin's pressurized section. The air was stale, ancient, tasting faintly of ozone and pulverized stone. They moved through corridors warped by ages of micrometeorite impacts and cosmic radiation. The rhythmic hum intensified here, a low, resonant baritone that seemed to bypass the ears and vibrate directly in the chest. I am showing a 98.7% sensor nullification field ahead, Serena reported, her voice flat over the comms. Standard radiation signature is non-existent. Passive sensors read a zero-event area. The anchor chamber, Kaylin murmured, his eyes fixed on a blast door almost 50 meters tall, perfectly preserved and bearing the same sigil of the balance. This was not a vault. It was a casket. JD, what is the frequency profile of the hum? The core resonant frequency resolves to a perfect fifth ambassador, JD stated. The secondary modulation registers a major third. It is a mathematical chord progression, an unnaturally precise acoustic signature for a decaying power source. Kaylin felt a stir of profound ancient history. This was too clean to be accidental. They reached the door. Kaylin touched the sigil, and a field of light flared a brilliant gold-white luminescence that did not cast shadows but seemed to absorb them. The light intensified around the wavy vertical line, the line representing precedent. Power Line 1. The ancient law was not written in stone but codified in perfect light. Suddenly the scale's alarm klaxon blared in Kaylin's helmet. "Ambassador, the requisition has arrived," Serena snapped, drawing her sidearm a gesture of futility against a heavy frigate. "They are broadcasting a full-spectrum message." Kaylin listened to the metallic, synthesized voice of the Iron Clerk captain, a being known as Commander Gravis. "Unidentified personnel on Vault Ruin 7. Cease and desist all activity. You are in violation of Legal Writ 44A Attachment 3. Surrender immediately, or your vessel will be seized and processed as evidence of asset tampering." "They are already engaging the tactical shield layers," JD reported. "They are preparing a Class 6 breaching charge for the structure directly above the anchor chamber. They intend to bypass the main door entirely. Their legal maneuver dictates the vessel is already theirs. They only need physical possession." "They are using law as a weapon, Serena," Kaylin said, his voice hard. He tried to hail Gravis, citing counter-precedents, but the clerk commander merely cut the feed. "Ambassador, we are too late for diplomacy. We need to leave now," Serena urged. "The scale cannot take a Class 6 breach charge detonation." Kaylin looked at the sigil of the balance, at the intensifying golden light. He knew fleeing meant surrendering the sector to the clerk's predatory jurisprudence. He had to act within the law, a law the clerks could not twist. JD, focus all available sensor power on the energy input signature for the charging breach device. Give me the waveform analysis in real time. Kaylin realized the hum was not a warning. It was a challenge, a query posed by the sleeping mind. The requisition's weapon systems locked onto the ruin. The air crackled with the raw energy buildup of the breach charge. The deep space environment outside turned momentarily blinding as the charge reached critical mass. Kaylin placed both hands on the sigil. The light burned against his gloves. JD, the perfect fifth and the major third. What are they demanding? They are not an access code. They are a lesson. A frequency array that requires a conceptual input to resolve the chord structure. Ambassador Southton. JD calculated quickly, his tone unusually strained. The array is testing the validity of the supplicant. It seeks proof of adherence to pre-apostasy doctrine. The array seeks to teach a fundamental principle of stewardship. Kaylin remembered his studies, the long hours spent sifting through dusty archives of the Age of Measure. The first Charter of Stewardship, the core document governing the discovery and utilization of ancient technology. He closed his eyes, ignoring the frantic countdown relayed by JD. The first charter states all salvaged assets are held in trust, never in ownership. The custodian must prioritize the universal ledger over personal profit and the long-term integrity over the short-term gain. JD transmit the first charter's core axiomatic structure, translated into the mathematical language of precedent validation. Transmitting now. This is an unprecedented engagement with ancient core arrays, Ambassador. The risk of catastrophic feedback is 78.4%. The world seemed to compress into a single point of light and sound. The requisition's breach charge fired a blinding blue spear of energy aimed directly at the chamber roof. Simultaneously, Kalen's input hit the sigil. The sigil of the balance flared with unimaginable intensity. The blue spear of energy struck the roof but did not penetrate. Instead, it was instantly diffused, absorbed by a sudden unseen field of geometric light that pulsed outward from the ancient door. The low rhythmic hum stopped. A new sound began. A colossal tectonic shift of metal against metal, an infinite groan of awakening. The floor beneath Kalen and Serena vibrated violently. Massive hull plates layered beneath the vault ruin for millennia began to separate and peel back like the petals of a metallic flower. The vault ruin itself was only a protective shell, a cradle. Beneath it, a mountain of dark, perfectly polished star metal rose into the void. It was not a ship built for speed or aggression, but a city in space. A colossal geometric vessel whose entire surface was etched with lines of mathematical precision, the Judgement of measure. Power Line 2. The ancient vessel was not a weapon of war, but a library of universal law wrapped in a mile of alloy hull. The requisition and its 3 escorts stopped their forward momentum dead. Commander Gravis's voice, now laced with disbelief and rising panic, crackled over the open channel. What in the void is that size class? It is not registered. It violates all standard tonnage limits. We demand identification, citing precedent, Statute 99B. Jurisdiction, identify us to the Iron Clerk vessels, Kalen commanded, standing up straighter in the sudden palpable field of power emanating from the relic ship. Affirmative. Transmitting registry data, Judgement of measure. Designation, Saint Ship. Current Commander Ambassador Kalen Var. Legal status, Sovereign Archive and Enforcement Asset of the Age of Measure. The Saint Ship was already asserting its own legal sovereignty, not through force but through pure, undeniable classification. Kalen felt a profound shift in his posture. He was no longer a weary diplomat. He was the temporary custodian of an ancient, terrifying legal doctrine. The clerks responded with hostility. A Saint Ship, that registry, is 3,000 years expired. You are operating an unregistered armed asset. Open fire. Focus on the largest exposed drive signature. Gravis's voice was a snarl of baffled rage. The clerks had encountered pirates, legalists, and diplomats, but never a vessel whose very existence negated their legal framework. The 3 clerk gunboats, the Rit, the Lean, and the Tax, opened fire first, lancing the void with concentrated plasma blasts. Their energy weapons, designed to disable and seize cargo vessels, struck the Judgement of Measure's vast black hull. The impact was silent in the vacuum, but the visual result was shocking. The plasma did not vaporize or slag the metal. Instead, where the energy hit, a precise geometric field of light instantly deployed. The light was not a shield, it was a grid. The Saint Ship's defense arrays are deploying, JD observed, his voice returning to its normal detached calm. They are not generating a repulsive field. They are initiating a precedent field. The grids did not stop the plasma. They logged it. The field calculated the exact energy signature trajectory and source identity of every single plasma bolt. Then, in less than a nanosecond, the energy was absorbed, processed through the Judgement's internal precedent matrix, and instantly mirrored. The reflected energy was not plasma. It was an overwhelming cascade of highly specific localized electromagnetic pulse EMP, coupled with a data flood that targeted the clerk's identity friend or foe IFF and legal authentication systems. The RIT instantly went dark, its main legal ID tag and navigation beacons shorting out, leaving it a drifting, lawfully invisible brick. Powerline 3, to attack the archive, was to submit to its calculus. The Saint ship did not destroy the enemy, but mirrored its own illegal logic back upon itself. The clerk's weapons fire has been classified as unlawful aggression against a sovereign legal archive, JD informed Kalen. The energy expenditure has been processed against the accrued ledger of precedent violation, and the equivalent cost has been extracted from the vessel's ability to assert legal identity. The RIT is now legally a space hazard, not an enforcement asset. This was the core of the Judgment of Measure's power, the mirror motif. It didn't fight wars, it enforced the cost of legal violation. Commander Gravis on the requisition watched the loss of the RIT not to destruction, but to legal erasure in disbelief. Fools engage the heavy disruptors, bypass their exotic fields, and call in the enforcement wing. Tell them the target is a pre-apostasy asset, whose seizure supersedes all local law. Kalen felt the sheer scale of the situation ratchet up. The requisition's heavy disruptors were weapons of war designed for ship-to-ship combat, not legal bullying. And the enforcement wing meant 3 more heavy frigates and their escorts. Escalation 1. The cost was no longer the scale's safety, but a full-scale legal war against the clerk's main local force. Gravis then added an even higher stake. Commander Gravis is adjusting his strategy. JD noted his computational arrays humming audibly, even through the Saint ship's vast bulk. He is diverting a contingency force toward the Viridian Transit Ring infrastructure. Target: the main anchoring pylons. He intends to use the destruction of a major piece of sector infrastructure as leverage to force your surrender of the Judgment. He's willing to sacrifice millions of civilian assets for a precedent, Serena exclaimed, gripping Kalen's arm. No, Kalen corrected, looking out at the distant shining curve of the transit ring. He's willing to sacrifice them because under their interpretation of the law, the destruction will be categorized as tactical asset relocation in pursuit of seizure, not a war crime. We have to defend the ring. On the Viridian Transit Ring's main control pylon, Chief Regulator Terrace watched the distant flash of the initial bizarre engagement near the vault ruin. Terrace's small office smelled of stale coffee and hot wire components. His job was to manage the immense power flow necessary to maintain the ring's rotational stability and navigation grid. He looked at his assistant, a young man named Zeph. They are engaging the vault. The clerks are fighting something they didn't anticipate. Zeph are our energy buffers full, max capacity regulator Terrace. We are running at a perfect stability count. But the clerks have issued a system-wide declaration of enforcement zone. They are citing a statute that allows them to seize any energy asset within the zone if a priority asset is under threat. Terrace slammed his hand on the console. They want the ring's power. They want to legally seize our energy to fuel their weapons against that new ship. That's not law, that's legalized theft. We are hours away from an enforced asset transfer. They were civilians entirely reliant on the sanctity of their ledger. Kalen stood on the Judgment's main command deck, a vast semicircular space of polished obsidian and glowing multi-layered displays. The silence was profound, broken only by the near imperceptible hum of the precedent matrix. He wore his diplomatic uniform, a sign that this was a legal engagement, not a military one. JD full power to all law arrays. Tactical priority defense of the Viridian Transit Ring. We will interpose the judgment between the clerks and the ring. The judgment's drive systems are still cold, Ambassador, JD warned. We can achieve minimal thrust, an acceleration of 0.003 g. Our primary maneuverability is negligible. Then we will use our mass. Kalen decided, a cold knot of resolve forming in his stomach. It is the largest single lawful asset in this sector. We will make them attack us, and we will force them to log every shot against the ultimate ledger. Serena, standing at a newly activated tactical console, a display that rendered the conflict not in raw energy, but in vectors of legal violation, nodded grimly. The clerk's enforcement wing is entering the system. 3 frigates, the Decree, the Statute, and the Mandate. Total of 6 heavy vessels, not counting their escorts. They are forming a coordinated attack vector. Kalen looked at the holographic projection of the judgment. It was a wall, a shield of sheer law and material density. JD, deploy the precedent fields in a cone formation, oriented toward the approaching clerks. Project a faint mathematical image of the sigil of the balance onto their hull sensors. We must teach them that they are attacking an archive of law. The massive Saint ship began its glacial, agonizing turn, its minimal thrust engines straining against its own mass. The movement was less a maneuver and more a gravitational inevitability. The ship positioned itself like a defiant, unarmed judge shielding a vulnerable witness. The clerks accelerated. Commander Gravis was leading the charge on the requisition, his ships firing simultaneously in a staggered wave to saturate the judgment's precedent field. The moment the plasma bolts hit the judgment's hull, the mirror effect deployed system-wide. The Saint ship did not just reflect the energy, it processed the data and transposed the hostile energy into computational overload. On the clerk's frigates, all navigation systems, fire control, and legal ID tags began to flicker and fail. Their targeting computers, instead of calculating trajectory, were suddenly forced to calculate the accrued cost of firing on a sovereign archive. This was the Saint ship's terrifying lawful gambit. It turned their technology against them by drowning it in hyperspecific, inescapable legal calculus. Powerline 4. The ultimate defense was not a shield of energy, but a field of perfect, unassailable logic. The clerks' coordinated formation broke apart in disarray, their pilots temporarily blinded, and their ships trying to vector away from the computational feedback. The Leon, one of the gunboats, drifted too close to the judgment's hull. The precedent field, registering the Leon as trespassing on sovereign legal territory, automatically initiated a low-frequency data lock. The Leon's crew lost all ability to maneuver their vessel, legally impounded by an invisible mathematical tether. The Leon is neutralized. Legal status, contempt of court, JD reported calmly. Commander Gravis, realizing the futility of conventional attack, adapted his plan. Escalation 2. He ordered the Decree and the Statute to execute a high-G bypass maneuver, planning to fly around the judgment's slow mass and directly target the ring. Ignore the data flood manual targeting. If we destroy the ring's anchoring pylons, the judge ship loses its strategic value. 2 vessels have broken free and are vectoring toward the ring. Serena reported, her eyes glued to the display, showing the rapidly closing clerks. They will be within firing range of the pylons in 120 seconds. Kalen felt a spike of panic. The judgment could not turn fast enough. JD, can we extend the range of the precedent field to cover the ring? We need a system-scale defense. Negative, Ambassador. Extending the field beyond optimal range reduces the strength of the mirror calculus by a factor of 8. We risk catastrophic system failure due to energy feedback absorption. We would be absorbing, not reflecting. "We have to try," Kalen stated firmly. "The integrity of the ledger, the safety of the civilians is the ultimate precedent. Prioritize the ring. Overload the primary capacitor banks." The Judgment strained. A vast, intricate pattern of light, like lines of ancient glowing text, extended from the Saint ship's hull and began to wrap around the distant Viridian transit ring. The effort was immense. Kalen felt the deck plates grow warm. "Warning!" JD's voice was now slightly distorted, a metallic rasp of computational stress. "Primary capacitor banks exceeding 95% thermal limit. Internal systems are venting excess heat. Minor hull integrity is compromised." The outer hull of the Judgment of Measure began to glow a dull red in localized areas as internal heat vents sealed for millennia opened violently to release pent-up thermal stress. A small smoking scar appeared on the black hull plating near the bow, an immediate tangible cost for the extended field. The decree and the statute reached their optimal firing solution on the ring's pylons. They fired in unison, two massive streams of white-hot disruptive energy streaking toward the target. The energy struck the newly projected precedent field. It held. But the field stretched thin did not mirror the attack entirely. Instead, it subtly bent the incoming energy, transposing the two streams of disruptive force just enough so that they collided with each other mid-flight, a spectacular, silent explosion that vaporized both bolts harmlessly in the void. Powerline 5. The true lesson of the Judgment was that law was not predatory, but a precise deflective force. The sheer energy load from the collision caused a major painful spike in the Judgment's internal systems. Kalen gasped instinctively, recoiling from the sudden heat radiating from the console. Primary capacitor banks are at 102% thermal load. Damage assessment. Minimal structural scoring near vent 7A. Heat margins are severely reduced. Tactical heat reserve depleted. JD reported the tone now absolutely flat. The clerks, however, were not finished. Gravis, seeing his most powerful vessels blocked, had one final desperate maneuver. Escalation 3. All ships disengage the attack on the ring, focus fire on the Saint ship's most visible thermal vent. We will expose this lawful asset as a derelict by overheating its core fire. The remaining clerk vessels, the requisition, the decree. The statute and the two remaining gunboats converged, targeting the smoking scar near vent 7A. This was no longer a legal gambit. It was a desperate, all-out military assault aimed at forcing a thermal shutdown. Kalen watched the converging attack lines, feeling the weight of the entire ancient archive resting on his shoulders. He had forced their hand, but he had also exposed his shield's weakness. "JD, can we count on another deflection?" Kalen asked, wiping sweat from his brow. The air on the command deck was now noticeably warmer, carrying the sharp, metallic tang of stressed alloys. "Negative. Our depleted heat reserve cannot absorb this much input. The next mirror event will guarantee core shutdown. Our defensive systems will fail. We are currently incapable of maintaining the rule of law." Kalen looked at the massive incoming fire. He had pushed the Judgment past its capacity for defense. He had acted lawfully, but perhaps not wisely. The arc of his stewardship was already testing the limits of ancient doctrine. He needed a new gambit, one the clerk's predatory calculus could not anticipate. The answer had to be found not in energy, but in precedent, in the very nature of the Saint ship's purpose. The 6 clerk ships closed in their weapons, charging for the final overwhelming volley. Kalen took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the display of the incoming fire vectors. Powerline 6, true stewardship, demanded not just the defense of law, but its ruthless, unyielding application. His mind raced, sifting through fragments of ancient legal theory, searching for a path that did not rely on heat sinks and capacitors. The Judgment of Measure was not a warship. It was a court. And a court did not just issue sentences, it offered sanctuary. It was a desperate, untested theory, a footnote in a dusty text he had read years ago. JD, a new directive. Kalen announced, his voice ringing with a sudden, sharp authority that cut through the rising tension. Disengage the precedent fields, retract all mirror arrays, and in their place project a zone of absolute sanctuary. Use Pre-Apostasy Charter 1, the Haven Mandate. Declare this volume of space a protected legal ground. Jurisdiction's vocalizer produced a faint, almost imperceptible click of surprise. Ambassador, the Haven Mandate is a theoretical doctrine. It has not been invoked in over 3 millennia. Its enforcement protocols are undefined. The probability of the clerks respecting such a declaration is 0.001%. They don't have to respect it, JD. Kalen countered, his gaze locked on the approaching storm of plasma. They just have to violate it. The mandate doesn't punish the violator with energy. It punishes them with truth. A new field of light bloomed from the Saint ship's hull. It was not the hard geometric grid of the precedent field. This was a soft, golden luminescence, a gentle, expanding sphere of light that seemed to absorb sound and motion, creating an aura of profound, unnatural calm. It was a statement, not a shield. The 6 clerk ships fired as one. A torrent of disruptive energy enough to cripple a planetary shield grid converged on the glowing red scar of Vent 7A. The energy struck the golden field of the Haven Mandate and passed straight through. For a terrifying, heart-stopping moment, Kalen believed he had made a fatal error. The energy tore into the Judgement's already damaged hull. The command deck shuddered violently, and a shower of sparks erupted from a secondary console. Serena cried out as the ship groaned under the impact, a deep, wounded sound of ancient metal tearing. Power Line 7. The sanctuary was not a shield against violence, but a catalyst for its reckoning. Hull breach on Deck 47, Section Gamma. JD reported, his voice steady despite the chaos. Minimal atmospheric loss. Structural integrity is compromised, but holding. Heat levels are critical. The cost of the gambit was immediate and painful. But then the Judgement's true response began. The golden field did not reflect the attack. It recorded it. It processed the violation not as an illegal act of aggression, but as a crime against the very concept of sanctuary, a transgression of a higher, more fundamental law. And the sentence was not energy, but information. Across the entire Viridian Divide, every single legal authority, transit controller, corporate entity, and sovereign system received a simultaneous, unblockable data burst. It originated from the Registry of the Judgment of Measure. The burst contained a perfect, unalterable recording of the Iron Clerk's attack, legally annotated with their violation of the Haven Mandate. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic for the clerks. Their legal standing, the very source of their power, evaporated in a nanosecond. Every Class 4 asset seizure, writ they held, was instantly voided. Every enforcement mandate was rescinded. Every ship's IFF tag, which once read jurisdictional enforcement, now flickered and resolved to a single damning word: pirate. Commander Gravis watched his command console turn from a tool of legal authority into a pirate's logbook. His face, projected on Kalen's screen, was a mask of pure, uncomprehending fury. "What have you done? You cannot just erase our authorities. We are the law." "You were the interpreters of the law." Kalen corrected, his voice cold and steady. "And you interpreted it into a weapon. The Judgment has simply corrected the record. It has issued its final count." On the requisitions bridge, Gravis's officers stared at their consoles in horror, watching their legal shields vanish, their operational mandates dissolve. They were no longer enforcers. They were outlaws trapped in a system that now saw them as a threat to be purged. Aboard the dust mote, Krell watched the official sector-wide legal status board flip. The icon for the Iron Clerk fleet, a stylized iron gavel, dissolved and was replaced by the universal skull and crossbones of a pirate vessel. "Father, look," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger. "They're pirates. The clerks are legally pirates." His father leaned in, his cybernetic eyes widening as he read the accompanying legal notice from the ancient unknown vessel. A slow smile spread across his grizzled face. "The old laws, they still have teeth. The transit authorities won't just ignore this. They'll have to act. We are safe, son. We are safe because someone decided to teach them the meaning of true law." The family watched as the distant, silent battle shifted. The hunters had become the hunted. Kalen felt the deep thrum of the Saint ship's core begin to stabilize. The immediate thermal crisis was over, but the ship was wounded, its hull scarred and bleeding atmosphere into the void. "JD damage report," he ordered, walking over to the console that had sparked. Serena was already there, running a diagnostic. The attack caused a 7% reduction in overall hull integrity. The primary energy conduits to the mirror arrays have been severed. We are for the moment defenseless in the traditional sense. JD's report was a stark reminder of their vulnerability. However, the Haven Mandate broadcast has had a 99.8% effective rate. All local and sector-level authorities have acknowledged the reclassification of the clerk fleet. Kalen nodded, turning his attention to the lore banks that were now fully active. He ran his hand over a cool, glowing panel, and ancient text scrolled across it. This was the moment he understood the Saint ship's soul. This archive teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. It did not seek to enslave or dominate. It sought only to balance the equation. "They won't run," Serena said, looking up from her console. "Gravis is too proud. He's lost his legal power, so now he'll rely on the only thing he has left, brute force. He's a cornered animal." Her prediction proved correct. The clerk fleet, now stripped of all legal pretense, reformed. Their movements were no longer the precise, calculated vectors of an enforcement fleet, but the ragged, aggressive formations of a pirate squadron. "Gravis is hailing us," JD announced. "Audio only." Kalen accepted the call. Gravis's voice was a low growl, stripped of all its previous legalistic pomp. "Ambassador Var, you have made a grave miscalculation. You think your ancient relic and its legal tricks can save you. But out here in the dark, the only law that matters is measured in megajoules. We will board your ship, tear it apart piece by piece, and I will personally eject you into the void." "Your threats are logged, Commander," Kalen replied calmly. "Every word is another entry in your growing ledger of criminality." "Your ledgers mean nothing," Gravis roared, and then the channel cut. The clerk fleet began to advance, their weapons glowing with raw, untethered power. They were no longer firing calculated bursts. They were preparing to unleash everything they had in a single, overwhelming alpha strike. Power Line 8, when the law failed, the corrupt, their only recourse was the chaos of unrestrained violence. "They are preparing for a full saturation bombardment," Serena stated, her knuckles white as she gripped the tactical display. "Our hull cannot withstand that. The breach on Deck 47 will rupture. We will lose the ship." Kalen looked at the display showing the Saint ship's internal systems. The mirror arrays were offline. The Haven Mandate was a one-time declaration, not a continuous shield. But there was one system he had not yet used, a system that lay at the very heart of the judgment of Measure's purpose. The ledger. "JD, you said the ship remembers by ledgers. Does it also collect on them?" "Affirmative, Ambassador," JD replied. "The ledger is not merely a record. It is an active account of legal and energetic debt. A writ of collection can be issued against any entity with a negative balance. What does a writ of collection entail? Kalen asked, a new dangerous idea forming in his mind. It is the ultimate expression of the ledger's purpose. The writ allows the judgment to seize assets equivalent to the debt owed. The seizure is not physical. It is a direct, system-level energy transfer. The assets can be anything from fuel reserves to weapons-grade energy. This was the final piece of the puzzle. The clerks had built their empire on asset seizure. Now, their own predatory logic would be turned back on them. As a reflection, but as a final, inescapable bill. Gravis and his fleet have accrued a considerable debt. Kalen stated more to himself than to the AI. Unlawful aggression violation of a sanctuary zone, threats of violence. Calculate the total debt, JD. Convert it into an energy equivalent. The calculation was almost instantaneous. The total accrued debt of the 6 vessels under the command of former Commander Gravis is 3.7 plus 10, 15 joules. This is equivalent to the entire operational energy reserve of their fleet, including their primary drive cores and life support power. Then it is time to collect, Kalen said, his voice as hard as diamond. Issue the writ of collection. Target the entire pirate fleet. Seize all available energy. Leave them with nothing but emergency life support for their crews. Execute. Executing, JD confirmed. There was no grand explosion, no flash of light. Instead, a series of intricate glowing lines like threads of golden light shot out from the judgment of measure. They were not weapons. They were connections. They bypassed shields and hull plating, interfacing directly with the clerk ship's power cores at a quantum level. On the bridge of the requisition, Gravis watched in horror as his ship died around him. The weapon systems went dark. The main drive sputtered and failed. The lights flickered and went out, replaced by the dim, terrifying red glow of emergency power. Power Line 9. The final judgment was not a sentence of death, but the cold, impartial math of a debt paid in full. The entire clerk fleet went dark, drifting powerless in the void. They were tombs of cold metal, their crews alive but trapped their reign of legal terror, brought to an end not by a bang, but by the quiet, inexorable logic of a balanced book. The ultimate seizure had been executed. Kalen watched the dead ships on the main display. He felt no triumph, only the immense, crushing weight of his responsibility. He had wielded a power that could bankrupt a system, a power that could erase an entire fleet without firing a single shot. His arc was complete. He had moved from a diplomat seeking to mitigate damage to a steward forced to render an absolute system-altering verdict. JD, transmit a message to the Viridian Transit Authority. Kalen ordered, his voice heavy. Inform them of the situation. Tell them there are 6 derelict vessels with living crews requiring rescue and lawful processing. Provide them with the complete, unalterable ledger of the engagement. Transmitting, JD confirmed. Serena let out a long, shuddering breath, her posture slumping with relief. It's over. We won. We enforced, Kalen corrected gently. There is no victory in the application of law, Serena. Only balance. He looked at the scarred hull of the Judgment, the price of that balance made manifest in scorched metal and vented atmosphere. The ship was a testament to the fact that even the law could bleed. The main command console chimed a soft, melodic tone. A new holographic display materialized in the center of the room. It was a ledger, the final official record of the encounter with the Iron Clerks. Line by line, it detailed every action, every violation, every countermeasure. At the very bottom, a new entry blinked in steady golden light. Case closed. Precedent set, the VAR-R doctrine. The precedent was now locked into the legal framework of the entire sector. It was a simple, powerful statement. The weaponization of law for predatory purposes was an act of bankruptcy, and the judgment of measure was its eternal collector. Kalen stood before the glowing ledger, the hum of the ancient Saint ship, a steady, reassuring presence around him. The air smelled of ozone-stressed metal and the faint, clean scent of filtered, recycled air. He could feel the slight vibration of the deck plates as the ship's internal systems worked to repair the damage. He touched the cool, smooth surface of the command console, feeling the immense weight of the history sleeping within this vessel. This was not an ending, but a beginning. A new age of measure had dawned. True justice is a heavy thing. It is not wielded like a sword, but carried like a shield. It does not celebrate victory for its every use, is an admission of a failure, a tear in the fabric of peace. The ledger is now open, and its accounts must be balanced. We are the custodians of that balance, the quiet accountants at the end of all things. We will not rule. We will not conquer. We will simply measure. The debt is always paid.